Morning, good morning, good morning. I feel pretty good this morning. Maybe ought not to. I'm kind of perplexed in a way, or conflicted, you might say. Every now and then, for one reason or another, there has been a concerted effort, not only interdenominational, but interfaith, truly in the global sense, for people to organize so thoroughly that I can't help but be caught in a kind of crossfire, no pun intended, of basically the idea that, particularly after World War II, or because of World War II, there are people around the world who still have a deep gratitude toward the U.S. And the warmongers, for example, and others step back and let the fray get to the point of mayhem, talking about how people are polarized just, very differently. Today there were a lot of messages from the people you usually hear about differently. For example, it is true, I just don't often say it, but I'm glad some initiative was taken. People talk about how, and it's true, in the people who, are in skyscrapers around the world and underground, and especially important people, the whole thing about, hate or fear that leads to plans for war, rumors of war, and industrial machinery grinding away to forge whatever is needed in terms of the resolve and the capacity for mayhem, at least. In the old days, before things got totaled up and combined onto one page and with those ticks and boxes and squares, when there was a general call for this and that, for example, once all the first really reliable computers were being deployed, I won't say which generation, it was nevertheless true that to call up the people to use those machines would result in many far-flung replies sometimes. And so that, if you were cited by commands or even peers, your number might come up multiple times, rather than on one page summarized by today's technology. Now, information may or may not be fairly granular and not necessarily summed up stupidly in today's technology, but in the old days it was you'd send out a message, you want certain people, and you'd wait about 2 or 3 weeks, and by that time you'd have a stack of recommendations, this, that, and the other person. And so that way Dad got stationed to Philadelphia, where he taught a class for about a year on how to use the damn thing, and he hated it. He hated everything military. Well, I don't know. I wondered about that, but anyway, I think he hated something else, but that's a different story. But he didn't like it. Back in those days, it was still impossible to get by on the housing allowance and the salary or pay to people in the Army, unless you were, at least a full colonel. and even then it wasn't much, but for example, you'd get quite a mansion to live in, but it wouldn't be yours, and all this. But anyway, he got to Philadelphia, and I remember that. I was, old enough to remember. And the snow was up to my neck, up to my neck, so I couldn't move around much. But I made it one day to the outside where the oil drums were, because we burned, heating oil in this rambling mansion that had been divided between the owners and some tenants. I think there were two apartments, and they weren't bad, but they weren't much. And of course, it was smoky and clunky because they were not good, modern burners. But I wanted to see it, and I went out there and looked at the oil supply, and I remember that was one of the few times I ever got in trouble with the landlord. He said, "Don't you get away from there." But anyway, so Dad was stationed there, and of course my mother was unreasonable about a lot of things. But he got in his car and drove, the 30 or 40 minutes to get to someplace where he taught doctors what amounts to coding, something that people pick up fairly reasonably without the crash course that he taught, class after class. It was scheduled there in Philadelphia because they had a machine. Can't say where it was and all the things that were being crunched through it, but they didn't yet have one, at the big main hospitals, the flag-bearing hospitals. But as usual, Philadelphia has its own, way of doing things, and so they had one, and they were. I dare say they weren't doing much coding in some parts of the country. But anyway, that was a work in progress because they had a bunch of people trying to figure out how to code and what to code and so on, and what could doctors do, or what were they willing to do, and what would be ultimately required of them, no matter their opinion of one thing or another. And of course, I knew that all along, when I was growing up, and of course, back then there were still plenty of people who thanked the U.S. for saving them, really. And so now, I heard some of that then from people, I would be introduced, I won't go into that, but it's one of those things, but I would be introduced and it'd be small talk and so on. And people generally, didn't know that Dad was in school during World War II. But he did do a bunch of stuff in Korea. But they would always thank, they'd say, your dad and his friends saved my whole life, and all I could do is agree with anything they said and so on. But many years later, of course, I can remember how people will talk about, the Cold War and so on. And so then, lately, to be getting all kinds of stuff from those same people who, have Putin up against the wall, they say, the Stalinists saying that he is not providing what Stalin did. Well, of course, that's true. But, they have raised their voice lately with people around the world who know how to get their message across, no matter the fact that you never tell these people anything, and this place is a hellhole as a result. But it's amazing how many people worldwide, and for example, particularly in France, Germany, and Russia, not so much Britain, and many parts of Asia, Japan, and just, it's complicated, but China right now, also complicated with Great Britain. Italy has just weighed in, and just with, you might say, early Valentines. It's just amazing. Well, I have nothing that I can say. I can say it's good that maybe people who might have detected a few, I'd say maybe 50%. What? And then I find out more like only 5% are reading over my shoulder, But today in Philadelphia, for example, in particular Philadelphia, they have been more explicit. So at least 35% reading over my shoulder, or making a few things clear, or if not clear, then more interesting. Completely apart from this snake eyes smuggery of spoiled brats, I'll just say it that way. And those same people have their song of dance event. I've heard it all many, many, many times before. But anyway, good luck, I'd say, to a lot of people, and then to those who send the Valentines, these early Valentines. Look, you could leave me out. I really appreciate it. You know I do. But why not turn your attention to the spoiled brats and tell them that maybe they ought to do better than become more and more flaky? Well, maybe that's just the propaganda machine, and they have some really top secret, wonderful things to offer. Well, then I just as soon not know about them. But to the good people who've gotten in touch, I figure people are on to what you're saying in Philadelphia. And I wish I could respond, maybe the whole state, for that matter, because I spent, about a year there when I was, just over 3 feet tall. And the snow was, it seems to me, it wasn't just snow that it had pushed into drifts or something. It was, the snow just seemed like it was at least 2 feet most of the time. But anyway, I can't claim to be a part of Philadelphia any more than Timbuktu. I don't have any reason or any way to leave this room, but I certainly am not going to remain silent when I have been so pointedly the recipient of goodwill where it counts the most in Philadelphia. For my money, and I don't have any. So, what can I say? I can just acknowledge what I've seen, and I estimate that in terms of reaching more people than just yours truly, sometimes I know it's about 5% of whatever's happening. And worldwide, these early expressions of goodwill before the U.S. Valentine's Day are appreciated, but I know only they're done in a way that leave a lot of people behind. But the ones in Philadelphia should at least be noticed by a few. Of course, among that few are people who will disregard the message because they're already in hot water and they think they can prevail with what they started out with. And I've said, get it over with. That's all. But it's hard to miss the goodwill that has come in, I'd say, in the last 10 days. But today in particular. What is today? Today is Saturday, February the 10th. Okay. And I have my troubles. I'm going to have to borrow money to buy food. That's never a good idea, is it? When you have to borrow money to buy food. Well, of course, in terms of war machines, they talk in terms of that, don't they? Well, that's something else. And thank you for your trouble and the goodwill, and that's enough for now, I think.